My name is Olivia. If you asked my family to describe me, they'd probably say I'm the responsible one, or worse, the daughter who never causes trouble. They used to say it like it was a compliment. Olivia always knows how to behave. But what they really meant was, Olivia keeps her mouth shut. Olivia cleans up after Logan. Olivia doesn't ask for anything. I grew up in Austin, Texas, in a family that made its name and money in real estate. My father, Richard, is the kind of man who walks into a room like he owns it, because half the time he probably does. My mother, Barbara, stands quietly beside him, managing reputations the same way he manages portfolios. Then there's Logan, my older brother, their golden child. Logan was always loud, charming, reckless. He failed upward, one failed venture at a time, and my parents kept throwing lifelines like it was their duty to rescue him from himself. When he crashed his first investment firm, Dad called it a learning experience. When he maxed out the family credit line, Mom said he just needs guidance. And me, I stayed quiet. I stayed steady. I got my degrees started. My business paid off my loans. I never asked for favors. I never demanded to be noticed. I just made things work. A few years ago, when my father decided to start passing down the family assets, he gave Logan 3 apartment buildings downtown, fully occupied, already profitable. Me. He handed me the deed to a crumbling old property near East 6th Street and said, "Do whatever you want with it. Just don't expect much." I didn't. But I made it into something anyway. That old building, I turned it into a local co-working and coffee space. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Every plant, every wall I painted, every customer who comes in by name, this place reflects me. Not the version my parents see, but the real me. The one who doesn't need to be rescued or praised. They never saw it. They still don't. Last Thanksgiving. Logan had just returned from Arizona, another business pivot, another pile of debt. But at dinner, you'd think he'd just closed a billion-dollar deal. My dad was all smiles, nodding along as Logan bragged about an exciting opportunity in crypto logistics, whatever that means. My mom refilled his wine glass like he was royalty. "You've got vision, honey," she told him. "Not everyone understands people like you." I sat there carving my turkey in silence, remembering the $20,000 Logan had borrowed from me 2 years ago for a time-sensitive venture. He never paid it back. He never mentioned it again. That night, I drove home listening to the hum of the freeway instead of music. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt small. Not because I was weak, but because they'd always made me feel like a supporting role in Logan's show. Like my quiet competence wasn't valuable, just convenient. Then this morning I got the email. Subject line: family meeting. This Sunday. No explanation, no context. Just, "We need to discuss a family matter. Please make time to attend. Don't make this difficult. No hope you're well. No love, Mom." Just the usual expectation that I'd show up and comply. But this time, something in me shifted. Not anger, at least not yet. Just clarity. A line had been drawn somewhere deep inside me, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to step over it. I looked up from my phone out the window of the space I'd built with my own 2 hands. The morning light hit the concrete floor just right, and I whispered more to myself than anyone else, "I'm done being the backup plan." Thanksgiving was always the same in our house. Same menu, same tablecloth, same hierarchy. Logan arrived late as usual with barely a text warning. My parents didn't mind. "He's just busy," they'd say. You know how driven he is. When he finally walked through the door last year, wearing some overpriced jacket and sunglasses indoors, Mom beamed like royalty had entered the room. "There's our star," she said, arms outstretched. He hugged her, one-armed, kissed her cheek, and immediately launched into a story about a tech venture that had big Silicon Valley interest. I didn't need to hear the details. I'd already seen the wreckage from his last 2 ventures, including the trail of bounced checks and burned contacts. Still, Dad clapped him on the back like he'd just come back from conquering Wall Street. "You think big, son? Always have. That's leadership." They didn't ask about my business. Not once. No one mentioned the cafe, or the fact that I'd doubled my revenue that quarter, or that I'd just been featured in a local magazine for building one of Austin's top-rated community workspaces. Instead, my mom handed me a dish towel and said, "Help me in the kitchen, sweetie." Let the men talk business. I remember standing at the sink, hands submerged in soapy water, watching Logan laugh with Dad over whiskey. And I felt it again, that ache I've known since childhood. That soft, slow erosion of being seen but never really seen. It wasn't always this obvious. When we were younger, it showed up in subtler ways. If I got straight A's, the reaction was, "Of course you did. You always do." But if Logan brought home a B, they threw a party like he'd climbed Everest. When I won a scholarship, they said, "Great, that'll help us save for Logan's tuition." When I landed my first internship, they asked if I could help Logan update his resume. Every win I had became a resource for him. Every loss he had became a crisis the whole family had to absorb. And I played along. For years. Because I thought being the good daughter meant being quiet, being useful, being unselfish. It wasn't until I moved out and started building something of my own that I even realized how much I'd internalized their story about me, that I was dependable, yes, but only in relation to Logan's chaos. I wasn't seen as my own person. I was his counterweight, his cushion, his safety net. And the truth is, I let it happen. I let them lean on me. I told myself it was love. I told myself it was duty. But it wasn't. It was survival. It was fear that if I stopped being useful, they'd stop pretending I mattered at all. The day after that Thanksgiving dinner, I opened my bank app and looked at the old loan I gave Logan. Still unpaid, still unmentioned. I typed out a message. "Hey, just checking any update on the $20K I lent you." I stared at it for a long time. Then I deleted it. What was the point? He'd either ghost me or spin some excuse. And worse, if I pressed him, my parents would say I was making things uncomfortable. That was always the word they used when I brought up boundaries. Uncomfortable. Like my discomfort never counted, only theirs. So when that email came this week, family meeting. Sunday. I didn't feel dread. I felt something else. Not fear, not guilt. Something sharper. Like the beginning of a line being drawn. I've lost count of how many times I saved Logan. Not because I wanted to, but because no one else would, and everyone expected me to. The first time I was 23 and fresh out of grad school. I had just started my first job, scraping by on a junior marketing salary. One night, Logan called out of the blue. His voice was rushed, dramatic like always. "Liv, I need a favor. Real quick, just a temporary cash flow thing." He needed $5,000 to cover rent on a shared workspace for his new business. Temporary, he promised. "You'll have it back by next quarter." I wired it that night. I didn't sleep after. Rent was tight, and that money had been my emergency fund. But I didn't want to make things complicated. I didn't want to disappoint Mom and Dad if they found out I said no. 3 months passed, then 6. No repayment, no updates. And Logan. He'd already moved on to another venture. I told myself it was a one-time thing, but of course it wasn't. Over the years, the requests became more casual, more expected. $2,000 to fix his car, $8,000 to buy out a business partner. Another $5K for some trademark lawyer he claimed was critical. Each time he acted like it was no big deal, like I was just helping family. And each time I said yes. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I told myself I can absorb this. He clearly can't. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was how invisible I became after giving it. No one thanked me. No one asked if it had put me in a bind. In fact, the only thing Mom ever said was, "That was very mature of you, Olivia." Logan just needs time. Time. He always got time. I got pressure to smile through it. I started to notice a pattern. Every time Logan got into trouble, the family would rally around him like he was the Titanic, and I was just the lifeboat expected to stay afloat no matter what sank him. I became his financial shock absorber, his emotional neutralizer, his fallback plan. And I hated it. But I didn't say anything, not because I was weak, but because I thought being quiet made me strong. I thought holding everything in made me solid, dependable, lovable. The truth, it just made me invisible. A few years ago, he came to me with what he called a game changer, a new real estate app that would revolutionize how Gen Z rents. He wanted me to co-sign a line of credit for $50,000. He said it was low risk. He said investors were already lined up. He said he just needed a signature. And I said, no. It was the first time I ever told him no. His reaction was instant rage followed by silence. Then the phone calls started from my parents. Why are you making this difficult? It's not like he's asking for your money. This is about supporting your brother. But I held my ground. Logan didn't speak to me for 6 months. And honestly, that was the most peaceful 6 months of my adult life. Saying no that one time should have felt like a breakthrough. Instead, it just revealed how fragile my place in the family really was. After I refused to co-sign Logan's loan, the silence that followed wasn't just his, it was everyone's. My parents stopped calling unless it was strictly logistical. No more casual check-ins, no more family group texts. I was still invited to holidays, but only out of obligation, and always with a quiet tension in the air. Mom started using that voice, the one people use when they're trying not to look disappointed but failing. I just didn't expect that from you, Olivia. You've always been so supportive, so generous. It was like they were mourning the version of me who never said no. The thing about being the good one is that it doesn't come with rewards, it comes with expectations. I was expected to hold the family together, to make the mature choice, to be understanding, to sacrifice. But no one ever asked what it cost me. I stopped mentioning anything personal in our conversations. There was no point. When I told them about expanding my business, they smiled politely and changed the subject. When I got interviewed by a local podcast about women entrepreneurs in Austin, I emailed them the link. Neither of them replied. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I needed praise, but because I wanted just once for someone in my family to say, I'm proud of you too. Instead, they treated my success like a cute hobby. Logan was visionary. I was practical. He was a dreamer. I was a backup plan. But it wasn't just emotional. There were real consequences too. When Dad updated the will 2 years ago, he called it just a formality. I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to seem greedy. But I found out later through an accountant friend of the family that Logan was listed as primary heir for the bulk of the real estate holdings. My name, I got the cafe building, the same one they used to call a teardown. No one told me. They just assumed I'd accept it like I always had. And for a while I did. I told myself that it was fine that I had freedom, independence, something of my own, but deep down it felt like a message carved in stone. You don't matter as much as he does. You never did. I started losing sleep. Not because I missed them, but because I realized how long I'd shaped my identity around their approval. Every decision I'd made, every quiet yes, every buried resentment, every loan I gave, every dinner I smiled through, I did it, hoping deep down that it would earn me a seat at the table. But the table was never mine to begin with. It was Logan's. I was just clearing the plates. And once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. At first, the silence just felt like space. A few less texts, fewer phone calls. I thought maybe it was temporary, that we all just needed time to cool off after the loan incident. But then birthdays came and went, with nothing more than a forwarded e-card. No calls, no visits. I sent them updates about my cafe expansion photos of the new upstairs lounge I'd built, the weekend art market I hosted for local creators. They left them on read. That's when I realized I wasn't just being punished. I was being erased. I stopped trying. Not out of anger, at least not yet, but out of exhaustion. I was tired of performing daughterhood like a job interview. Tired of measuring every word, every boundary, every breath against how it would be perceived. So I went quiet too. And something strange happened. I started to feel lighter. Not happy, not free. But for the first time in years, I had room to think about myself, my wants, my future, about who I might have been if I hadn't spent so much of my energy being supportive to people who only noticed me when they needed something. My world shrank, but it also became more mine. My business grew. I built a strong team. I was invited to speak at a local college on women-led entrepreneurship. I even took a solo trip to New Mexico, something I never would have done before. And somewhere between the silence and the solitude, I started to understand the real difference between distance and abandonment. Distance is what you choose to protect your peace. Abandonment is what happens when people only love the version of you that serves them. One afternoon, I ran into Logan's old college friend at a networking event. He recognized me, made small talk, then leaned in and said, "You know, it's kind of amazing how much you've done. Logan always said you were the low-key genius in the family." I smiled, but it didn't land, because if Logan ever thought that, he sure never acted like it. What he did do was borrow from me, lie to me, forget me. And he got away with it every time, because he had my parents' blessing, because I never demanded better. But now I wasn't angry, I was aware. I could see the shape of the pattern, and more importantly, I could see how I'd helped build it. I don't know exactly when the switch flipped. Maybe it was after that run-in. Maybe it was after another voicemail from Mom that started with, "We just want to get back to how things used to be," and ended with, "But only if you can stop being so difficult." That word again. Difficult. As if asking for boundaries was a personal attack. As if standing up for myself was betrayal. That was the moment I stopped mourning what I never really had. I wasn't part of a family. I was part of a system, one that only worked if I stayed small, silent, and generous on demand. But I had changed. Quietly. Steadily. Like a tide turning long before the shoreline noticed. The moment everything truly clicked didn't happen in some dramatic family showdown. It happened on a random Thursday over lunch with an old friend. Her name's Harper. We met in undergrad and kept in loose contact, holiday cards, social media, likes the occasional catch-up coffee. But that day, it was different. I had just spoken on a local business panel, and she'd attended to support me. Afterward, we grabbed lunch at a small diner nearby. I was still in my blazer name tag clipped to the lapel when she leaned forward and said, "Liv, you were incredible. Seriously. But why do you talk about your business like it's something you just stumbled into?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You keep brushing off your success," she said. "You just spoke to a packed room and you're still acting like you're the backup singer in your own story." I laughed it off at first, but something about her tone stuck with me. That gentle firmness, that look in her eyes like she was seeing something I couldn't or didn't want to. We kept talking. She asked about my family, and against my better judgment, I told her everything. Not in bullet points, not in the polished version I usually give outsiders. I told her about the money, the pressure, the silences, the way my parents always framed my boundaries as disrespect, the way Logan's failures were everyone's problem, but my successes were always expected. When I finished, she didn't say anything for a moment. She just stirred her coffee. Then she looked me in the eye and said, "Liv, that's not a family, that's a hierarchy." I opened my mouth to protest, but I couldn't, because deep down I knew she was right. "They've trained you to feel guilty for existing independently," she said. "That's not love. That's control." It hit me in the chest, sharp and clean. Not because I hadn't heard it before, but because it came from someone who had no stake in the outcome, no guilt to weaponize, no legacy to protect, just truth. "You know," she added, "it's okay to outgrow a system that never saw you clearly." That line stayed with me. I went home that night and sat in the middle of my living room, the lights off, just staring at the wall, not crying, not spiraling, just still. I thought about all the ways I'd tried to earn a seat at the table, how many times I'd shrunk myself to fit into a role they designed for me, how often I'd mistaken manipulation for obligation. I realized I wasn't just tired, I was done. Done apologizing, done being the emergency fund, the emotional crutch, the silent daughter. Harper had said one more thing before we left the diner. "They will call your boundaries betrayal. That's how you'll know they were never boundaries they respected in the first place." And she was right. The next day I called my lawyer. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew this much. The next time my family asked me to clean up Logan's mess, they wouldn't be asking Olivia, the good daughter. They'd be facing someone they hadn't met yet, me. The email had been sitting in my inbox for 3 days before I opened it again. Subject line, family meeting, Sunday at 2 p.m. The message was short, cold. We'd like to discuss an important family matter. Your attendance is expected. Please do not make this difficult. No greeting, no warmth, not even a hope you're doing well, just the expectation that I'd show up, no questions asked. Like always. Still, something inside me hesitated, something old and sticky, that quiet, treacherous hope. What if this time was different? What if they'd finally seen the truth? What if they wanted to apologize? What if they'd come to understand what I'd been saying all along? I hated that the thought even crossed my mind. But hope, I've learned, isn't always a choice. Sometimes it just lives there buried deep even after everything. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't need to. With my family, silence was compliance. If I didn't explicitly say no, they'd assume I was coming. So Sunday afternoon, I pulled into the circular driveway of my parents' house, the same one I used to rollerblade around as a kid, dodging flower beds and pretending it was a racetrack. The bricks looked the same, the hedges were trimmed, the windows gleamed like they'd been cleaned just for show. Funny how places can stay exactly the same while everything inside you changes. I sat in the car for a full minute before getting out. I wasn't afraid exactly, just aware. This time I wasn't walking into their house as the good daughter. This time I was paying attention. When I stepped inside, the smell of lemon polish and Mom's perfume hit me like a wave of déjà vu. She came into the foyer a moment later, lips tight, but painted in her usual soft rose gloss. "Olivia," she said with a nod. No hug. Dad followed behind her holding a manila folder. Logan wasn't in sight yet. We moved into the formal sitting room, the one reserved for guests and holidays. The one I wasn't allowed to sit in as a kid unless I promised to keep my shoes off the rug. A glass of water sat on the coffee table. No snacks, no tea. This wasn't a visit. This was business. I sat down slowly, smoothing my skirt. So I said, "What's this about?" Dad cleared his throat. Mom looked at him, then back at me. "It's about Logan," she began. Of course it was. "He's in a difficult position," Dad added, with the new project in Nevada. "He had a few financial setbacks and I cut in. Is this where you ask me to loan him more money?" Mom's lips pursed. "Not a loan. An asset transfer. It's about family legacy." She reached for the folder in Dad's hand and passed it to me. I opened it. Inside were documents, formal notarized drafts proposing a voluntary transfer of my property title, my cafe building, the one I built from nothing. The explanation was dressed up in family-first language, something about consolidating assets into a trust for future protection with Logan as the operating trustee. I laughed. I didn't mean to, it just escaped me. A sharp, bitter sound. "You want me to sign over my building?" "To Logan." Mom's voice was calm. "It would still belong to the family. You'd have input, but Logan would manage it as part of the new fund." I looked at them both. Their faces were neutral, practiced. I should have known. Deep down I did know, but some part of me, some naive, stubborn part, had still hoped. Hoped they'd see me this time, not as a resource, not as a fail-safe, but as a person. Instead, here we were, again. And for the first time, I didn't just feel disappointed. I felt angry, quiet, focused, cold. Not the kind of anger that makes you yell, the kind that makes you plan. I held the folder in my lap like it might burst into flames. The papers inside were too neat, too rehearsed. Legalese disguised as love. My building. The one I'd poured 6 years of sweat and sleepless nights into. The one they once called a waste of space. And now they wanted it. Because Logan needed a bailout again. I looked up at them, slowly. My father leaned forward, elbows on knees, doing that thing where he lowered his voice like we were business partners. "Look, Olivia, this isn't about taking anything from you. It's about protecting the family's assets. Logan is spearheading this expansion, and centralized control is the only way to move forward." I raised an eyebrow. "So centralized control means putting everything under Logan's name." He blinked. "Temporarily. The trust will be overseen by the family. Your mother and I will be involved. It's just more efficient this way." Efficient. Right. Mom chimed in, then using her softest voice. "Honey, you've always been so responsible, so steady. That's why we know you'll understand what's at stake here." I could feel my jaw tightening. That was the thing about my family. They didn't yell. They didn't threaten. They complimented you into submission. They guilted you with praise. "You're the strong one. You've always been so mature. He just needs more support right now." They built the trap from nice words and closed doors. "What exactly happens if I say no?" I asked. A beat passed. Dad glanced at Mom. Mom smiled tightly. "Well," she said, "we'd hope you wouldn't force us into a difficult situation. Refusing could create tension, especially given the legal structure your father has spent months preparing." Ah, there it was, the velvet glove slipping off the iron hand. This wasn't a request. This was pressure wrapped in polite language. Classic Richard and Barbara punish the rebellion, not the act. I leaned back in my chair. "And Logan?" I asked. "Where is he?" "He's in Nevada securing contracts," Dad replied. "But he sends his gratitude. He's confident you'll do the right thing." The right thing. Like there was only one path. Like everything I'd built didn't matter compared to Logan's next gamble. It wasn't even about the money. Not really. It was the assumption that I would give, that I always give, because I'm Olivia, the good daughter, the team player, the one who doesn't make things messy. But this time, something cracked. I stood up, folder still in hand. "Thank you for the meeting," I said, voice steady. "I'll take these to my attorney. Expect a formal reply by the end of the week." Mom's expression flickered something between surprise and insult. "Olivia, that's not necessary. We're family." I met her gaze flat and firm. "Exactly, which is why I won't be signing anything I haven't read with someone who actually protects my interests." Dad started to protest, but I turned before he could finish. As I walked out, my heels echoed across the marble floors, the same floors I used to slide across in socks as a child, back when I still thought love was earned through obedience. I reached the door and paused. Without turning around, I said, "You may not see it yet, but I'm not the same Olivia you think you raised." And then I left. I didn't sleep that night. I kept thinking about the folder, the signatures they expected, the trust they'd already drawn up without me. I sat at my kitchen table long after midnight laptop open documents spread out legal terms blurring together. At first I was just trying to understand what they'd done or what they were trying to do. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized something didn't add up. There was a line in the draft trust document that caught my eye: asset consolidation per preliminary title assignment, initiated February 1st. I froze. February 1st. It was currently late March. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the digital records for my cafe's deed records I hadn't looked at in months because why would I? I owned the building. I'd paid off the loan. The title was in my name. Or so I thought. I logged into the county property site and typed in the parcel number. My stomach flipped. There it was. Title transfer request. Status pending. Filed February 3rd. Initiator Logan Whitaker. Representative Richard Whitaker. I sat there, hands frozen over the keyboard. They'd already started the process. Without my signature. Without my knowledge. The meeting hadn't been to ask permission. It had been to secure compliance. A formality so they could say they included me. Rage started in my chest, slow and simmering, not hot like a fire, cold sharp like broken glass inside my ribs. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. By morning, she had already replied. "Olivia, we need to talk. In person. This isn't just unethical, it may be illegal, but it's going to get messy." Messy. My family hated that word. They used it like a curse. "Don't make this messy, Olivia. We don't need drama. Keep it in the family." But now I understood what they really meant. Messy meant power shifting. Messy meant truth. Messy meant I wasn't playing along anymore. By noon, I was sitting across from my attorney in her office watching her highlight section after section of the trust draft. "They tried to file an anticipatory transfer based on internal family authority," she said. "They assumed your silence equaled consent." I shook my head slowly. "Can they really get away with that?" "Not if you fight," she said. "But you'll need to be ready. They'll deny everything. They'll gaslight. They'll make you out to be the villain. I let that sink in. Was I ready? Not emotionally. Not yet. But somewhere under the fear, under the exhaustion, under the ache of betrayal, there was something else rising. Conviction. Not just to protect my building, but to finally fully reject the role they'd written for me. No more good daughter, no more quiet fixer, no more silent permission. They crossed a line this time, and this time I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to fight. I didn't call them. I didn't scream. I didn't even send an angry email. I went quiet. And in that silence, I started building. My lawyer and I worked every day for a week, gathering documents, tracking timelines, pulling communication records. She filed an emergency injunction with the county registrar to freeze the title transfer process. That bought us a little time. But I knew my family. They wouldn't just back down. They'd double down. They'd twist the story before I had a chance to breathe. Sure enough, the phone calls started 3 days later. First, it was my mom leaving me a voicemail with that airy, passive-aggressive tone she mastered so well. "Sweetheart, we're so confused about your reaction. This was supposed to be collaborative. I wish you had spoken to us directly before getting legal involved." Then came the email from Dad. More formal, polished, full of phrases like misunderstanding, family unity, and regrettable miscommunication. And then Logan finally made contact. A single text. "You just blew up decades of work for what ego?" I stared at it for a long time. I didn't reply. Because ego had nothing to do with this. They called it ego because it was easier than calling it what it really was, agency. For the first time, I wasn't reacting emotionally. I was acting strategically. And nothing terrifies manipulative people more than calm resistance. While they panicked, I documented. I went back through my financial records, every transfer to Logan, every favor, every time-stamped piece of proof that showed a pattern. I had always supported them. They had never supported me. And then I started reaching out. I contacted the property manager next door to my cafe, someone who once told me Dad tried to buy them out 2 years ago and got furious when they refused. She agreed to give me a statement if needed. I reached out to one of Logan's former business partners who had gone radio silent after their Nevada deal imploded. He responded almost immediately. "You're not the only one they tried to silence," he wrote. He had receipts, emails, texts, even a recorded call. Piece by piece, I was assembling a picture they couldn't spin. Not in court, not in front of an audience, and definitely not in front of me. But this wasn't just about legal leverage. This was about reclaiming the story, my story, because for too long they'd told it for me, that I was stable, that I was generous, that I was the one who never asked for anything. But here's the truth. They never wanted to say out loud, I didn't ask because I knew they'd say no. I didn't take because I knew they'd resent it. I didn't fight because I believed love was conditional. And now I had proof that even that belief had been too generous. So I kept building. Quietly. Deliberately. And when the paperwork was ready, when every loophole was closed, and every clause backed by hard evidence, I scheduled a single meeting. Not at their house, not at mine, at the lawyer's office. I sent a simple message. All future discussions regarding property or trust matters will take place with legal counsel present. You may contact my attorney directly. No warmth, no explanation, no apologies, just clarity. And that silence, the one they once weaponized to control me, now belonged to me. Because now I wasn't hiding. I was waiting. And the next move, it would be mine. I thought freezing the title transfer would be the end of it. I thought once they realized I had lawyers involved, they'd back off. Maybe get scared. Maybe finally respect the boundary I drew. I was wrong. The real attack didn't come through legal channels. It came through reputation. 2 weeks after my injunction was filed, I received an email from the cafe's bank. A fraud alert. Someone had attempted to access my business account using an old family co-signature from back when my dad helped me secure the property loan 5 years ago. The access should have expired. It had officially. But they found a clerical loophole, an outdated authorization form that hadn't been fully voided. The bank flagged it before anything happened, but the message was loud and clear. They weren't just trying to take my building. They were trying to erase my independence. Then the whisper campaign started. Vendors I'd worked with for years suddenly had concerns. One sponsor for an upcoming local entrepreneur event pulled out. When I asked why, they sent me a vague message about recent concerns about instability and litigation. I didn't need to guess where it came from. Logan had always been messy in private but polished in public. He knew how to look credible. He knew the right words to make doubt sound reasonable. And now he was painting me as volatile, as someone who couldn't handle pressure, as someone who was letting personal drama jeopardize professional obligations. I wanted to scream, not just because it was cruel, but because it was strategic. They knew I valued my work. They knew my business was my life. So now they weren't just going after what I owned. They were going after who I was. And that broke something in me. Not in a shattering way, in a sharpening way. It was the first time I understood what people meant by the phrase "no way back." There would be no reconciliation after this, no healing conversations, no final tearful apologies, just war. But the thing about war is it forces you to decide who you really are, and I wasn't afraid anymore. They thought they could intimidate me into silence, but I had been silent for decades. What scared them wasn't my voice, it was the fact that I'd finally stopped needing their permission to use it. So I got louder. I called the bank, directly got the old signature removed permanently, filed a report. I contacted the business bureau, submitted an incident log detailing the attempted breach. I informed the local event committee about the source of the rumors and attached legal proof of the family conflict to back my story. One by one, the doors they tried to close on me, I kicked back open, because I had the truth, and I had the receipts, and this time I wasn't playing by their rules. They wanted to take everything from me and blame me for reacting. They forgot I'm not Logan. I don't crash and expect others to clean it up. I rebuild. And this time I'm rebuilding with steel instead of silence. It started with a blog post, not from Logan himself, of course. That would be too obvious. Instead, it was published anonymously on a regional business gossip site, a place where reputation lived and died in half-baked headlines and comment sections. The title is one of Austin's top young entrepreneurs just riding on family wealth. The article didn't name me outright, but it didn't need to. An East Side cafe owner, daughter of a prominent real estate developer, accused of overreacting to internal family restructuring. The comments section did the rest. People connected the dots. People who didn't even know me were suddenly dissecting my life like it was up for debate. Sounds like someone got cut out of the will and is throwing a fit. Nepotism at its finest, crying when the money stops flowing. I heard she's being sued by her own family. I should have been shocked. But I wasn't. This was exactly Logan's playbook, dirty the water until everyone forgets what the original issue was. He couldn't take my building. He couldn't silence me legally. So now he was trying to make me look unstable, entitled, and irrational in public. The move was bold, and for a second it worked. A few regulars stopped showing up at the cafe. An email from a potential investor went cold. Even some of my staff looked nervous, like they were waiting for me to blow up, confirm the rumors, prove him right. But I didn't. Because while Logan played loud, I was already playing smart. I forwarded the article to my lawyer. Then I sent it to Harper, my college friend, and now quietly my strategic ally. She had PR experience and a long-standing grudge against manipulative men in power suits. We met the next morning at my cafe before opening. "He's going after your credibility because he's out of leverage," she said, sliding her tablet across the counter. "So we take that as a signal it's time to go public with our version." "A statement?" I asked. "More than that," she replied. "A story, but told on your terms. Controlled, documented, human. No rage, just facts and receipts." I nodded slowly. I wasn't interested in revenge through scandal, but I was done playing defense. It was time to go on record. We spent 2 days crafting a carefully worded open letter published under my name on a verified business platform. It was personal, but professional. Calm, but clear. I didn't attack. I revealed. I detailed the timeline of events. I shared screenshots of correspondence, including Logan's initial request and my parents' pressure campaign. I clarified the legal freeze on the property, the attempted unauthorized access, and the coordinated rumor-spreading effort. And I ended it with a single sentence: I will not be bullied into silence, especially not by those who have mistaken my loyalty for weakness. The post went viral, and this time the comments were different. This is what gaslighting looks like in wealthy families. Good for her for standing up to the golden boy treatment. I've been through this. The scapegoat always gets vilified first. It didn't solve everything, but it shifted the air, and for the first time I wasn't just surviving their narrative. I was rewriting it. I didn't expect the post to blow up like it did. I thought maybe it would earn me a handful of quiet nods from people who'd been through something similar. Maybe a few supportive emails. A couple of new customers if I was lucky. What I didn't expect was for the piece to be shared by major business newsletters, picked up by 2 podcasts, and retweeted by a handful of small business influencers who'd never even stepped foot in Texas. By day 3, it had over 200,000 views. And that's when things really started to unravel for them. The first crack came through a LinkedIn update. A former investor in one of Logan's ventures, a slick man in his 50s with a long list of failed tech projects, shared my post and commented, "This checks out. I watched this family force her to prop up garbage deals for years." Suddenly, Logan wasn't just dealing with his little sister throwing a fit. He was dealing with a paper trail of people he'd burned, now empowered by someone else, finally saying what they'd stayed silent about. Within a week, 2 more former partners of his reached out to my legal team to offer documentation. One even volunteered to testify if it came to court. Another dropped a digital folder into our inbox labeled "Everything I Should Have Said 2 years ago." Inside were emails, text threads, audio recordings, Logan bullying team members, overpromising money he didn't have, blaming Olivia for delays she had nothing to do with. And now, with my story, public people started believing them. Because the myth of Logan, the charismatic visionary, the misunderstood genius, depended entirely on silence. Mine, theirs, everyone's. But silence was no longer on the table. Even local media caught wind. An independent journalist asked to interview me for a piece on family abuse in wealth-driven businesses. I declined publicly kindly, but the point had already landed. This wasn't a family feud, it was a power play. And I was done letting them shape it like I was the problem for simply saying no. At first, my parents tried to remain neutral. Mom sent a vague poetic message about wounds being aired too publicly and hoping I would return to reason. Dad sent nothing. He'd always preferred legal maneuvers over emotional ones, but when the donors for their charity board started pulling support due to concerns over leadership ethics, they suddenly wanted to talk. I received an email titled, "Let's meet privately." I didn't reply, because by now I knew what private meant: manipulate behind closed doors, control the optics, spin the truth. And I was done with private. Everything that mattered had already been said in the light. Meanwhile, Logan, he cracked. He made the classic mistake arrogant men make when they lose control. He went loud, too fast. He posted his own statement, rambling, emotional, filled with contradictions. He called me unstable, ungrateful, a nobody who thinks she's a martyr. He name-dropped our parents, dragged my business, accused me of trying to destroy the family. But the internet had already turned. Because while I told my story in facts and timestamps, Logan flailed in ego and tantrum. His post got flagged for misinformation within hours. The comments were brutal. "This reads like a man used to never being told no. Funny how ungrateful means not giving him free assets anymore. Sir, you just lost the plot. Sit down." And somewhere between his self-destruction and the growing wall of support forming around me, something inside me shifted. I didn't feel scared anymore, or small, or reactive. I felt solid, steady, rooted. Like I had finally stepped fully into my own story, not the one they assigned me, not the one I played to keep the peace, but the one I had chosen to fight for. The cafe stayed open. Customers came back more than ever. I started receiving invitations to speak on boundaries, women and financial independence, family toxicity in business. I accepted a few, declined most, because I wasn't chasing visibility. I was reclaiming my voice. And the louder Logan got, the quieter I became, because I no longer needed to prove anything. I'd already won. After Logan's public meltdown, I thought the worst was over. But I was wrong, because when narcissists lose control of the narrative, they don't surrender. They expose themselves, and sometimes that's the most brutal truth of all. 3 days after his rant post went viral, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. It was my mother. Her voice was trembling, not with sadness, but with anger that she had to make the call herself. "I hope you're happy," she said, skipping hello. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this family?" I stayed quiet. "Your father hasn't slept in days. Logan is devastated. Our name is being dragged through the mud because you couldn't keep your feelings in check." There it was. Not once did she ask if I was okay. Not once did she question if anything I said might be true. It wasn't about truth. It was about damage control. "You could have just come home. We could have fixed this. But no, you had to play the victim on the internet like some stranger to us." I took a breath. "Mom, I didn't do this to the family. You did when you chose to protect Logan over and over again. When you tried to steal my building. When you let him sabotage my life, then made me apologize for reacting." She scoffed. "So now you're the martyr. How convenient." I felt nothing. No guilt, no heat, just clarity. "I'm not the martyr," I said. "I'm the one who finally stopped lying for all of you." She hung up. No apology, no shift. Just a slammed door like always. But what came next was worse. The next morning I received a formal letter from a new legal team representing my parents, not Logan, declaring their intent to remove Olivia Whitaker from all future inheritance and fiduciary trust arrangements due to public defamation and family betrayal. It was absurd. I had never asked for any inheritance. I had already accepted that Logan was the golden child, but now they wanted to make it official, out of spite, out of punishment, out of sheer ego. They weren't just cutting me off. They wanted to write me out of the story entirely. I showed the letter to my lawyer. She shook her head. "This is posturing, but it proves one thing: you struck a nerve. Badly." And yet it still hit me. Not because of the money, not even because of the cruelty, but because even after everything, after all the emotional labor, the sacrifices, the silence, the loyalty, they still saw me as disposable. I spent that night alone in my apartment, curled up on the couch with the lights off, not crying but numb. Not because I was broken, but because I was done pretending. Done pretending they were complicated. Done pretending they meant well. Done pretending I was ever part of something real. The truth was finally bare. I had never had a family. I had a system, one built around Logan, maintained by obedience, enforced by guilt. And now that I wasn't feeding the machine, they discarded me. But here's the thing about starting over. When everything false has burned away, all that's left is the real you. That week, I changed my last name legally, not as revenge, as liberation. I updated my business licenses, my website, my signage. I notified the press that future statements would come from Olivia Rae, not Olivia Whitaker. I was no longer a branch on their family tree. I was planting something entirely new. And the most freeing part, no one could take it from me. Because I had built it from truth. Not from loyalty, not from fear, not from blood, from truth. And the moment I let go of the fantasy that they would ever come around was the moment I realized I was never alone. I was just finally free. The irony hit me while I was locking up the cafe one night. For years I'd tried to protect the family, to keep things in-house, to absorb the damage silently so the outside world would still see a polished legacy. And now that legacy was crumbling, not because I exposed it, but because the people who built it on favoritism and secrets couldn't hold it together once I stepped away. The first real fracture came from inside, an anonymous email to my lawyer's office. Subject line, "You need to see this." Attached was a PDF of an internal memo from one of my father's development companies outlining irregularities in fund allocations involving Logan's Nevada project. The sender, a mid-level accountant whose name I recognized, she'd worked family books for years. Always quiet, always loyal, until now. She included a note I stayed silent longer than I should have. "But you were right. and I'm done helping him lie. That email opened the floodgates. Over the next 10 days, 3 more whistleblowers emerged. 2 were former assistants, 1 was a contractor who'd been stiffed on payment and pressured into silence. And they all said the same thing: Logan had been bleeding money for years, covering it up with shell budgets, inflated projections, and forged approvals signed under Dad's name. I watched the documents roll in file by file until the truth became too loud to bury. Then came the press leak. Not from me, from someone in the financial watchdog community. A local outlet ran the story, "Whitaker Real Estate under review for internal misconduct. Allegations of fraud and misuse of trust funds surface." The next day, my parents' charity announced a temporary freeze on activities pending internal review. 3 board members resigned. 1 corporate partner withdrew completely. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt still. This wasn't revenge. This was the inevitable outcome of a house built on sand. And suddenly, Logan was nowhere to be found. He deactivated his social media accounts. His phone went straight to voicemail. A friend of mine in legal circles said he'd been seen boarding a flight to Costa Rica alone. No luggage, no return ticket. My parents, they didn't reach out. Not to apologize, not to explain. But my aunt, my mother's sister, sent me a handwritten letter. It was short, no excuses, no denial, just one line I'll never forget. "I always wondered what would happen if you stopped protecting them. Now we know." I folded it carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. Not because I needed validation, but because it reminded me that truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, relentless, just like me. And as the cracks in their empire widened, I finally understood I didn't destroy the family. I just stopped being the glue. The first morning I woke up with no unread messages from lawyers, reporters, or my mother was disorienting. For a moment, I lay there in bed wondering what crisis I'd forgotten to manage. Then I realized there wasn't one, just sunlight bleeding through the window, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the timer in the kitchen, and silence. Not the tense waiting for the next hit kind, the good kind, the peaceful kind. I got up, wrapped myself in a sweater, and walked barefoot to the kitchen. The hardwood felt cool under my feet, the floor that I paid for, the home I rebuilt, with my name, my terms. It had been a month since the last public statement. 3 weeks since Logan disappeared from every traceable platform. 2 since the development board opened a formal investigation into his business activities. And 1 week since I legally finalized the renaming of my business Rae & Co., a name with no family ties, no stolen legacies. Just me. The new sign went up quietly. No press release, no Instagram announcement, just a simple line on the storefront. Same heart, new name. And people noticed. The customers who came in weren't there for the drama. They were there for the espresso I'd spent years perfecting, the warm light, the quiet music, the way our baristas learned people's names and favorite pastries. Business didn't just survive, it bloomed. Because what I had built was real. It had never depended on borrowed clout or family money. And when the illusions burned away, what was left was solid. I began to move differently, more slowly, more deliberately. I stopped answering emails after 6 p.m. I said no to events that didn't excite me. I started attending a weekly yoga class, not because it made a good photo, but because it made me breathe deeper. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't building anything to prove I belonged. I was just living. I didn't realize how much energy I had spent editing myself to fit inside a family that had never once made space for me, until I no longer had to. There was grief, of course. Not for them, but for the version of me that had waited so long for their approval. That girl who once practiced the right tone before answering her father's calls. Who smiled through insults disguised as compliments. Who gave more than she had because she thought that's what strong daughters did. I loved her. I forgave her. And then I let her rest. Because I was someone else now. One morning, Harper came by the cafe. She leaned on the counter and smiled in that way she does when she's about to tell you something you already know. "You're softer," she said. "Is that a good thing?" I asked. "It's a real thing. she replied. You used to look like you were bracing for impact even when you were laughing. Now you just show up. I smiled, not because I was trying to be polite, but because I meant it. I no longer needed to brace. There was nothing coming for me anymore. No demands, no obligations, no expectations I didn't choose. Just me, and the life I decided to live. I was closing out payroll for the week when the email came in. Subject line, partnership opportunity. Let's talk normally. I ignore messages like that. Most of them are either vague sponsorship offers or flashy collabs that don't actually align with what I care about. But something about the name caught my eye, Cedar Row Collective. I blinked, then opened the email. They were one of the fastest-growing ethical business incubators in the region, focused on sustainable women-led companies. I had admired their work from afar for years, but never considered myself big enough to be on their radar. Until now. The email was warm, direct, from their director of outreach herself. Hi, Olivia. We've been watching your journey, not just your cafe, but the way you've redefined your brand, your voice, and your leadership. We're looking for a flagship partner in Austin. Would you be open to a conversation? I sat back, rereading the lines. They weren't interested in me as a token. They didn't mention the scandal. They didn't reference my family name once. They saw me, just me. And I realized I didn't feel nervous. Not the way I used to in boardrooms or pitch meetings. I wasn't planning how to sound agreeable or how to protect my image. I was just curious, intrigued, and for the first time in a long time, completely in control. We scheduled a meeting for the following Thursday. They flew in 2 reps from Seattle along with their head of partnerships. We met at a neutral space, a quiet, co-working lounge with floor-to-ceiling windows and no nameplates. They asked thoughtful questions about my vision, my boundaries, my values. Not once did they ask how much money I came from. Not once did they ask how Logan was doing. They had done their research, not just the headlines, but the patterns, the resilience, the actual work. Halfway through the meeting, their lead rep leaned forward and said, "You're the kind of partner we want, not because you're loud, but because you're principled. You know what it costs to walk away from power that doesn't respect you. That's rare." I didn't smile to impress her. I smiled because I finally believed her. They proposed a flexible partnership expansion funding for a second cafe concept co-branded under my terms with full creative control. They'd handle back-end logistics, distribution support, and mentorship programs. In exchange, they wanted authenticity, not perfection. Presence, not performance. 10 years ago, I would have asked, what's the catch? 5 years ago, I would have panicked about proving myself. Even a year ago, I might have over-prepared, afraid they'd see my scars. But now I asked for a week to think, not because I was uncertain, but because I'd learned the power of pausing, of choosing, not chasing. And when I said yes, it wasn't with hesitation. It was with clarity. We shook hands. We ordered coffee. We talked about build-outs, not backstories. And that night, when I walked through the doors of my cafe, still warm with conversation and laughter, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not success, not triumph, not even relief. Alignment. I wasn't performing anymore. I wasn't surviving anymore. I wasn't trying to reclaim a place in a family that had never seen me. I had built something entirely new, and the world had noticed. Not because I shouted, but because I stood. And finally, the right people found me because I stopped hiding who I was. It arrived in a plain white envelope. No return address, just my name handwritten in steady, familiar script, Olivia. For a moment, I just stared at it, frozen in my doorway, with the rest of the mail slipping from my hands. I hadn't seen that handwriting in over a year. Not since the last family holiday I swore I'd never attend again. It was my father's. I sat at the kitchen table, sunlight filtering through the curtains, and opened it with slow fingers. No card, no logo, just a single sheet of paper folded carefully into thirds. No Dear Olivia, no date. Just this. You were never easy to understand. Not because you were wrong, but because you didn't need the approval the rest of us lived on. I thought that made you cold. Your mother thought it made you stubborn. Logan thought it made you weak. We were all wrong. I watched you walk away and assumed it was temporary, that you'd circle back, that you'd come home eventually because that's what daughters do. But you didn't. You didn't come back because you didn't need us, and I suppose that scared me more than I admitted. You asked once what would have happened if you'd said no sooner. The truth is, I don't know. Maybe we would have punished you then, too. But I do know this. We built a house on your silence, and when you stopped being quiet, everything cracked. I don't expect you to forgive me, or respond, or care, but I needed you to know you were never the weak one. You were the only one telling the truth. I read it twice. The first time with my breath caught in my throat. The second time with a strange, steady stillness spreading through my chest. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a request. It was recognition. The thing I had screamed for in my head for so many years. The thing I had tried to earn through good grades, quiet obedience, holding the family together every time Logan collapsed. And now it was here, in 12 unadorned lines, years too late, but real. I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I didn't call him. I folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box on the shelf next to the old business license with my former last name and the keys to the first cafe space I ever rented. Artifacts, not anchors. That letter wasn't a bridge. It wasn't a new beginning. It was a gravestone. For the version of me that waited too long for someone else to admit I mattered. It wasn't closure. I didn't need closure. It was confirmation that I hadn't imagined the damage, that I hadn't overreacted, that the silence had been real, and I had been right to break it. Later that night, Harper came over. I told her about the letter. She raised an eyebrow. "So are you going to respond?" I shook my head. "No, I don't think it was written for that." "Then what was it for?" she asked. I smiled, finally understanding. It wasn't for him. It was for me, to prove I don't need the last word to know I've already won. And I meant it. 1 year ago, I stood in this exact spot outside the front door of my cafe, hands trembling, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Back then, I still hoped for a phone call, still checked for Logan's name in my inbox, still thought that maybe, just maybe, things could go back to normal. Today I don't check, I don't wait. And I definitely don't hope for anything from people who taught me that love comes with terms and conditions. This morning, as I unlocked the cafe, now proudly bearing the name Rae & Co., a woman stopped me on the sidewalk. "Are you Olivia?" she asked. I nodded, a little cautious. She smiled. "I just wanted to say thank you. Your story helped me leave something I should have left years ago." And then she walked away. No dramatic hug, no tears, just a quiet moment of solidarity between strangers who had once both felt like shadows in their own lives. That's the thing no one tells you about healing. It doesn't look like a victory parade. It looks like peace. It sounds like silence. And it feels like being alone but never lonely. A year ago, I thought my story ended when I walked away from my family. Now I know. That was just the first chapter. Because I didn't just walk away from them, I walked toward myself. And that's the only reunion that ever really mattered. If you've ever been the one who stayed silent, to keep the peace, to hold the family together, to avoid being called dramatic, selfish, or ungrateful, I see you. And I want you to know, your silence may have protected them, but it cost you something. Maybe it was your sleep. Maybe it was your joy. Maybe it was your sense of self. But here's the truth. They never wanted you to believe you were never the problem. The problem was that you noticed too much, felt too deeply, expected accountability where others preferred comfort. And when you finally said enough, they didn't hear your boundary, they heard betrayal. But what they call betrayal, I call beginning. Because walking away from what breaks you is not weakness, it's wisdom. It took me years to learn that, years to believe that I didn't need their permission to matter, to exist, to thrive. And now I wake up every day knowing that the version of me who walked away trembling, terrified but determined, saved my life. So if you're standing at that edge wondering if it's too late to choose yourself, it's not. You don't need to burn the whole bridge, you just need to stop carrying the weight that was never yours to begin with. You deserve more than survival. You deserve wholeness. And trust me, on the other side of silence, there's something waiting for you. Something real. Something yours. Something free. Don't wait for their permission. Write your own ending. And if you need to start from the middle. Here's what I learned. Just because someone raised you doesn't mean they respected you. Just because someone says family first doesn't mean they included you in that equation. And most importantly, just because you were the quiet one, the peacemaker, the fixer, doesn't mean your voice doesn't matter. It matters, deeply, loudly, even when it shakes. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. You don't owe anyone your silence to keep a seat at a table that only serves their comfort. You can walk away. You can rebuild. You can name your pain without being defined by it. And on the other side of that choice, there's space, there's peace, there's you unfiltered. So if you're watching this and something in your chest feels like it's cracking open, if you've been nodding through the pain, smiling through the unfairness, shrinking just to stay included, this is your sign. Not to burn it all down, not to fight harder, but to finally choose you, because your story doesn't end in survival. It begins with sovereignty. Speak, step, start. And when you do, we'll be here.